Horror Nights is upon us! Well, for y'all, I'm recording this in May, likely editing it in June. Also, this is about the 2022 event, because last year's was and this year, future me can probably tell you. It is good. See? '22's event was certainly the best in recent memory, to the point where a few Floridians had to come to terms with the levels of effort on display. And given how 2021 was basically a re-education for everyone after not having any haunt at all in 2020, 2022 felt like it had something to prove. Still, it wasn't perfect. There were your normal standard acts of murdy, predictable boo holes, loud raucous dubstep music, and egregiously long black hallways of nothing. But adding a scare zone in front of the animal actor's restroom, awesome giant crowman characters, and Death Eaters in Wizarding World with a mini gauntlet? Woo! Also trans rights. However, today's topic is about what were the best scares, both personally and objectively, in each maze. House. Haunted attraction. Whatever. They're great moments that I have an affection for. And totally not because I worked at about half of them and saw them ad nauseum. You're welcome. That said, we'll kick things off with...
The killer clowns from outer space have landed.
Being based on the 80s cult classic, the scares took inspiration from iconic scenes. The cotton candy room, the pizza delivery gag, the rabid balloon dog, murderous man-eating shadow puppets. And while not a scare, my favorite moment from both years was the endless hallways of shrinking doors.
Another door! Another door! Another door!
With it being more or less the same as 2019, there was little that surprised me about this one. Still, its psychotic funhouse atmosphere was a welcome addition to the event. As my favorite goes, the phantom car at the end came close. It certainly tapped into a common fear with its blaring horn and blinding lights. Oh, and we'll talk about blinding lights in a bit. But my favorite scare... Maybe I'm just a sucker for chittering little creatures, but I loved the popcorn clowns. Yes, they're essentially heads on sticks, and I'm not sure if it was because they improved the design or altered the performance tactic for the blackout characters from 2019, but they were still effectively scary heads on sticks. Alright, now on to the first house I worked that season.
Ladies and gentlemen, The Weeknd.
Based on the visual and musical stylings of one Monsieur Ebel, The Weeknd After Hours Nightmare sent you on a journey through the consequences of vanity and excess to, well, nightmarish proportions. And yet, even the rumor of the house's inclusion seemed to confuse those unfamiliar with his style. Sure, retro synthwave can be haunting, but that alone doesn't lend itself to capital H haunt or horror at large. However, upon further investigation of his music videos for the After Hours album, yeah, it's perfect. Why would anybody doubt this in the first place? Still, I was intrigued the whole time because this was the first music maze since Black Sabbath in 2013, and I honestly think it was one of the best houses of 2022. Being inventive as it was trippy, and a motif that kept popping up from the blinding lights room on was that of a toad, used for reasons, as seen in the music video for Heartless, which resulted in this. Big deal, Florida had that too. But they didn't have this. Big Foggy. Now, this was far from the first time a stilt character was featured in a maze, but it was the first for a quadrupedal stilty after its inclusion in the 2019 Spirits and Demons of the East Scare Zone, and it was just as effective here. I should know, I was in this host position for 2.5 hours one night. The best reaction I witnessed was the first kid after a break got so scared, he threw his hood over his head and jumped in the corner opposite the performer. It was pretty easy to stifle my laughter most times. This was not one of those times. That nearly became my favorite scare, but that still has to go to the one a few scares before. Just after the Save Your Tears room, you enter an empty hall ripped right out of a German expressionist film, when the curtains and wall reach out at you. Rather a pair of hands and a person dressed in the same pattern as the curtains and the wall reach out at you. It was a simple, cheap carny trash trick,
And I loved it.
Let us now move away from the dreaded IP to something original. Well, original. Transplanted from Florida, Scarecrow the Reaping took you through a Depression-era farm where murderous sentient scarecrows have taken over. And though it was light on story, the scenes and scares were top-notch. Very reminiscent of a pre-Murdy HHN or Not Scary Farm attraction. The thing that surprised me was the amount of scares it had. For your average maze, there'd usually be 1, maybe 2 characters per scene. Scarecrow had all of them. Pretty much every hallway had 1 around every corner, sometimes 2 popping out from either side, and bigger spaces had no less than 3. So it'll come as no surprise that the best scare was one of these barrages. Once in the barn, you were greeted with not 1, not 2, but upwards of 4 hits as you made your way through the hallway. A veritable gauntlet of scary aviary deterrents, and a beautiful example of haunt choreography. My favorite, however, wasn't necessarily a scare, but more a sensory scenic element designed to elicit reactions of startled disgust. Right after the barn, you entered the rookery, or aviary for crows, and large droplets of water would fall on you, simulating not scary per se, though it could have been to someone with sensory issues, but it was a personal highlight for me. The other maze that was gracious enough to employ me that year was one I was probably the most excited about returning to the event. Based on the myth, the first La Llorona maze premiered in 2011 with a follow-up in 2012. Both following variations of the story of a young mother who fell in love with a rich man, gave her kids a very long bath in the river, then when the man's love was unrequited, she also took a very long bath in the river, and her spirit now walks along the banks crying while looking for her children. Also something about being cursed to wear a horse's head and eating disobedient kids. Now, yes, John Murdy, while he does extensive research to flesh out these houses as much as possible, doing his best to represent them with the utmost respect, is still very... Fortunately, a cultural consultant was brought on to avoid any risks of accidental insensitivity, and for the original in 2011, it was Diego Luna. Yep, Cassian Andor and Michael Jackson himself was co-creator for The Maze. And I'd say his influence shined through. Even though I never experienced either version prior, the 2022 house was similar enough to get the gist. As a host, I gotta say, it was infinitely better. At the exit, I saw people, grown adults, running out. Because when you're faced with the image of a giant monster zombie mommy snacking on some kids, then having that lunge out of the darkness at you, yeah, I'd run for the exit too. My favorite scare of the house came much earlier. In fact, it was the very first room. In the church scene, the pews were filled with mannequin mourners of La Llorona's children. And yes, she did pop out toward the front of the room, But not all those mourners were fake. They'd see your shadow as you walked in, and then let you have it when you passed by. After all, sometimes the best scares are the most unexpected. Anyway, let's talk about combo mazes for a bit. Since 2006, mazes have been centered around a single character, movie, story, or concept. On occasion, anthology films or TV shows are the subject of a house. American Horror Story, Creepshow, and Trick or Treat, for example. In that instance, each set of scenes will be based on each segment. Cramming multiple films in a single maze, however, not saying it can't be done. 2018's Universal Monsters was the best example of this, though more celebration of all the classics and mostly Frankenstein. It's just your typical mazes are structured like Fantasyland dark rides, truncated narratives that cover the majority of the story. So when it comes to the horrors of Blumhouse mazes, I'll be honest, these traditionally have been the weakest attractions in recent years, with the strong exception of the first in 2017 and the last third of 2018's. Happy Death Day and Sinister lent themselves well to the shorter format. The production bumper was a blanket of slate they clearly had fun with, and The Purge just works better as a scare zone. I'm sorry, the first Purge was garbage. Enter 2022's The Horrors of Blumhouse, featuring Freaky and The Black Phone. Both good movies in their own right. Half that maze was wasted on The Black Phone. Absolutely no disrespect to the filmmakers and even less to the HHN creative team. This whole thing needed to be longer or completely dedicated to one film or the other. No doubt, the Grabber became an instant horror icon, so using him and the variations of his mask for nearly every scare in the segment was probably the best option. However, the Grabber is only half of what that movie offered. Case in point, the ghost kids that helped the main kid try to escape. Benevolent as they may have been, not including this aspect did a major disservice to the movie. On the other hand, this would have created an Exorcist situation where you'd go through the same room over and over and over and over again, only with less variation than Reagan's bedroom. So, the best scare comes from the freaky half in the form of the table saw. You could tell this was the centerpiece of the house because in every video I've seen, the character made sure to start after every gap. But my favorite, I talked a lot of smack about it just now, but it's from The Black Phone. Specifically the title sequence. Hang up the phone! I didn't expect them to pop out there. Then again, not expecting people to pop out of screens tracks with me. But speaking of my children...
Universal Monsters, Legends Collide.
It's no secret what I think of the monsters. And what I think of the monster mazes. Legends Collide was no exception. If this were a countdown, this would easily be in the top 3, but it wouldn't be number 1. Because here's the thing about the monster mazes. The first in 2018 was so amazing and well done, it was damn near perfect. Since then, it's not that they've gotten worse or that they figured since the first one was that good, why bother trying to top it? But they've been more about shining the spotlight on the other kids. Larry only had 2 appearances total in the first, so they dedicated half of 2019's maze to him. Bride went from cut up on a Merlin's table to still cut up on a Merlin's table, but extra crispy, and you can't do my pretty girl that dirty, dang it! Hence, 2021's girl boss Bride of Frankenstein lives. Legends Collide expanded on Mummy and Dracula's roles, but faced them off against Wolfman as well. A first in Universal Monster lore. The 3 of them are after an ancient Egyptian amulet that can grant them powers to control their respective curses. For Talbot, to not turn into a werewolf every full moon, for Dracula to walk among humans in the daylight, and for Caris to not need a master or keep the amulet. It's not really clear. They all lose to Anubis anyway, who's a werewolf or something apparently, which was telegraphed by all the Anubis statues in every scene leading up to him. Just needed to add Abbott and Costello and this would have been perfect. But it's in that climactic final grab for the amulet where my favorite and the best scare is, and also another example of excellent haunt choreography I mentioned earlier. The triple scare. Mummy followed by Dracula followed by Wolfman. It would have been easy to all jump out at the same time, but coordinating the attacks to hit one right after the other right after the other. Ugh! Loved it! So it's only logical to chase this high with a maze that nobody cared about. Universal Horror Hotel was a rare instance of an original concept for the event, and totally not because it was supposed to be Evil Dead Rise, but they had to pivot at the last minute when the movie got pushed back. Why would you think such nonsense? Ignore that. Please. But that happens all the time. They'll work for months writing, pitching, and designing these attractions, even going so far as to build the layout, only for the owners of the IP to say, nah. And so they pull the old favorites out of storage. And since they had already built the general idea of a hotel and installed some of the effects in preparation for Evil Dead, that became the Hotel Universal, a dilapidated luxury resort from the 20s turned into a haunted attraction. How meta. But it turns out that it's actually haunted by the owner and other folks who suffered tragic fates at the owner's hand, all of whom provide the poppy-outy scary bits. Shame I never got to experience most of them. An interesting quirk of haunted house attractions is they sometimes turn into giant conga lines of guests. Great for the operation, as that keeps wait times low and guest counts high, but they don't get a good show. One group might get a scare at the right time, but the group in front of them would have just missed it, and the group behind them already knows what to expect or just won't get it at all. I went through that thing 3 times. This happened to me every single time. So as far as the best or my favorite scares, I got nothing. It likely would have been the triple scare here, but I didn't even know there was one until my 3rd walkthrough. And even then... I was impressed by how they managed to transform the Walking Dead attraction into this, not only utilizing more of the Q4 attraction space, but making it look wholly unrecognizable. But if I could pick a favorite moment, this requires a little bit of backstory. So, right before this was announced, Haley posted a Twitter thread essentially pitching a dark Hollywood maze, which concluded with a cult whose dark rituals were the cause of all the events in the attraction. Horror Hotel ended like this. Great minds think alike, I guess. Anyway, here's Halloween. Let's see. We had the first movie represented in 2015, Halloween 2 in 2016, no Season of the Witch except for some references in the previous 2, and Halloween 4 in 2018 and again in 2021. So this one was based on the first movie. Good call. It just so happened to be more or less the same as it was in 2015 because of that, but I don't think that was a complaint anyone made. Literally, this could have been based on Halloween 5, and it still would have been massively popular. But Halloween 5 is a completely different movie, and they already had the sets and costumes for the first, so... Michael Myers is a horror legend. They'd be fools not to keep parading him out every couple of years. I mean, it helps that the first movie was so freaking good and established him as the icon he is today, random acts of zombie notwithstanding. Literally, mannequins dressed like him elicit terror. and then putting them in a mirror hall, evoking his uncanny omnipresence in the movie with costume performers springing to life in between? The best! But my favorite part was our final example of excellent haunt choreography. After the second bedroom scene with the Judith Myers headstone on the bed, you'd go outside, where you'd catch a brief glimpse of Michael before he fades back into the darkness, among the white sheets hanging from a clothesline, lightly blowing in the breeze. Is he still there? And with your focus locked onto the sheets. Working this maze the last 2 weeks of the event, this was my favorite position to be in, just so I can see this in action. The best part? As scared as people were of the Michael that just popped out at them, they'd always turn around and look into the sheets, looking for the boogeyman. Anyway, that's the video. Bye! Thank you so much for watching this video. I am recording this immediately after employee preview night. I am very tired. Regardless, now that you're here, go ahead and leave in the comments what your favorite scare of 2022 was. It doesn't have to be Hollywood. You could describe one from Florida. I'm open, but if you are new here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified of all future uploads. There's a lot of theme park content on the channel, and there's gonna be a lot more coming, especially for Horror Nights. This is going. It's that time. But if you would like to support me monetarily, you may do so over on my Patreon. See those names scrolling by on screen? Those are my supporters. They're cool. They're my cool kids. And for as little as $1 a month, you too can see your name scroll by on screen, read aloud by me if you're a newcomer, and even brand new videos coming out before I post them to the channel. But if you decide to give me $10 or more a month, you gain access to the Cool Cats Club, where we have a pretty fun and chill live stream at the end of every month. Usually the last Tuesday, but I'm flexible. And you will be joining such illustrious people as Ashley Hines, Bennett Billard, Chris Meter, Danielle Garcia, David Gansel, Kooky Trails, Lisa Sturgis, Nicholas DePorto, Pander Plays, Tendo the Seal, Tony Goldmark, and Trevor Gumble. Any amount will do. You can cancel any time, and no grudges will be held if you decide to cancel. I get it. Rent is more important. And food. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. More is coming, especially in the Horror Nights category. Hey, hey. And as always, Black Lives Matter. Trans rights are human rights. Stop AAPI hate. Free Palestine. Stay safe, stay healthy. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And bonus nachos, kids. I'm gonna go to sleep now. Good night.